It is a dangerous, sad, painful time. Indeed, we are experiencing one of the most consequential eras in our nation's history. In our nation's history for women's equality, abortion rights, racial justice, and the dignity and freedom for LGBTQ people. An age too often where the cruelty is the point. Our work is guided by the belief that control over one's body is fundamental to other rights, and that attacks on abortion rights are attempts to control women's full participation in society. I won't lie. The onslaught of attacks on our rights and bodies can feel overwhelming. But we must remember threats to equality are not new. And we, the Women's Law Project, you, our allies, and our supporters, we won't back down. And to that end, I'm going to turn this program over to a panel of the Women's Law Project's reproductive rights experts to discuss current litigation before the U.S. Supreme Court and our case before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And please stay tuned to the end of the panel for an important announcement from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. Good evening, everyone. I'm Amal, the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Women's Law Project, where I've been working out of the Philadelphia office for the last 15 years. Thank you for joining us tonight to talk about the future of abortion rights in Pennsylvania. If you have any questions as we're going through this panel, please type them into the Q&A box and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can at the end. Our panelists tonight are Dr. Lisa Perriera. She is Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Thomas Jefferson University, an abortion provider at Cherry Hill and Philadelphia Women's Centers, and a board member of the Women's Law Project. Next, we have my colleagues, Sue Frietsche, who is Senior Staff Attorney and the founder and director of the Western Pennsylvania office of the Women's Law Project, and Christine Castro, a staff attorney who has been with WLP since 2016, initially working out of our Pittsburgh office, and now she is based in Philadelphia. So I'm going to start tonight with an icebreaker type of question that I hope will help guide the discussion here tonight. So to the panelists, if you had the power to change one thing about the way abortion is being discussed today, what would you change? So Dr. Perriera, why don't we start with you?
Well, thank you so much. What I want to change is that we say the word abortion, abortion, abortion. We need to say it more. We need to recognize that people with uteruses have abortions. And this is not something to be stigmatized. It is something to be recognized as mainstream healthcare.
Great. Thank you. Sue, how about you?
Hi, if I could change anything about the way abortion is discussed, I think I would like everyone to stop using the term pro-life to describe anti-abortion legislators. So this term is a cynical marketing ploy, right, to distract us from the reality that anti-abortion legislators don't actually care about women or pregnant people. They do not care about maternal mortality, and that it is off the charts, and that it's worse in states with heavy abortion restrictions. I mean, it is just ridiculous that nobody in the so-called pro-life caucus supports the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, and that is why we have not yet been able to pass it. So that is what I would wish.
Yeah. Thanks, Sue. Christine, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Amal. And I agree with Lisa and Sue. Those are excellent points. I also think that today's verdict underscores how we have yet to reckon with racism and white supremacy in this country. And when something that's missing, a critical piece of the conversation, is that abortion bans are racist and they perpetuate this country's long history of reproductive oppression of women of color, and in particular, Black women. And again, the public discourse around abortion often leaves out any mention of race or white supremacy. And that's a mistake for many reasons, especially because the anti-abortion movement has a long history of being complicit and having allegiance with white supremacists and upholding racist ideologies. And that's often a critical piece that's even overlooked by folks who identify as progressive. So I think that that is something we need to do better with.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Christine. Pennsylvania is a state that perpetuates the reproductive oppression that you just mentioned. And we have many abortion restrictions on the books that are not truly pro-life because they cause nothing but harm, resulting in a lack of meaningful access to abortion for so many people, particularly people with low incomes, people of color, rural residents, and young people. So under the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act, for example, patients have to get a state-scripted lecture. They have to wait 24 hours before receiving their abortion. Minor patients need to obtain either the consent of one parent or a court order, and patients on medical assistance do not have abortion coverage because state law prohibits the use of state funding. And physicians then face civil and criminal penalties if they do not comply with the law. And what I just mentioned is just a little bit of the law, of all of these things that we have in Pennsylvania that are barriers to access to abortion. And then we have fake clinics called crisis pregnancy centers, which we shorten to CPC. And those are anti-abortion and anti-contraception entities that are not pro-life at all. They take advantage of the types of restrictions that I mentioned. For example, by targeting people seeking abortion care and misleading them into believing that the CPC has given them the state-mandated lecture when it has not, further delaying that person's access to the abortion care that they need. So these CPCs are yet another barrier to healthcare, and Pennsylvania is one of a relatively small number of states that actually funds them directly. The Women's Law Project, as part of an alliance of state advocates for women's rights and gender equality, recently released a report on CPCs called Designed to Deceive, a study of the crisis pregnancy center industry in 9 states, including Pennsylvania. And the report is available on our website. It's also in your related content box that should be on your screen. So you can take a look at the report and see learn much more about CPCs in Pennsylvania and about some of the work that we've done here at the Women's Law Project related to that issue specifically. So there are many abortion restrictions in Pennsylvania, and it really is an honor to work at the Women's Law Project, where every day we help people seeking abortion care and we help medical providers navigate the complicated and treacherous legal framework around abortion rights. And, today is November 19th. On December 1st, as we probably all know, everyone here listening to this tonight, that the U.S. Supreme Court is about to hear arguments on December 1st in the Mississippi Dobbs case. And the outcome of that case is likely going to narrow or overrule Roe v. Wade. But before we get into what that means for the future, let's talk a little more about what it's like today. So my next question is for Dr. Perriera. Could you please describe for us what it means to be an abortion provider today?
Thanks so much, Amal. Well, being an abortion provider today is a constant battle between providing the safe medical care I was trained to give and compromising that care because politicians have created medically unnecessary barriers. I serve on the Women's Law Project board to thank this organization for the amazing things they do for abortion providers like me and the patients that we serve. For many of you watching, abortion is sometimes an abstract thing that you agree with philosophically, but you don't actually know what it's like for pregnant people in Pennsylvania to access abortion. So I'll tell you the story of a typical patient. Patient named Maria, 17 years old. She became pregnant, and she knows that now is not the right time for her to parent. So she calls a clinic in Pittsburgh, and she doesn't know this, but she learns that she needs state-mandated consent for abortion. And that consent has to be done more than 24 hours before she can actually access her procedure. Me as a doctor, I have to tell her medically unnecessary information about the person that made her pregnant being responsible to provide child support, even if that person has agreed to pay for the abortion. But that's not all. She has to get parental consent. And her parents would never consent to her having an abortion. She knows that. So Here's where the Women's Law Project enters the picture. The clinic refers Maria to the Women's Law Project to meet with Christine Castro, who prepares Maria for her meeting with a judge for judicial bypass. She gets her order, but it's not easy. Now that she gets the order from the judge, she can make her appointments. But because Ohio has closed so many of their clinics, there are no available slots in the clinic in Pittsburgh for her. So she has to travel all the way to Philadelphia to get the procedure done. All that travel just because rights are being restricted. When she arrives in Philadelphia, she has to have medically unnecessary tests like dipping her urine for glucose and protein, because if I don't do these tests as her doctor, I may be subject to heavy penalties. Then there's the problem of how Maria is going to pay for the abortion. She somehow has to find $500 because she has government-based insurance, and government-based insurance does not cover abortion, except for in the instances of rape, incest, and threat to maternal life. Luckily, there are funds like the Abortion Liberation Fund in Philadelphia that helps subsidize the cost of her abortion. And thankfully, Women's Law Project is involved in litigation to make it so that Medicaid insurers and government insurers will eventually pay for abortion procedures, as they should. The last hurdle she has to jump through is when she arrives at the clinic, there are 30 protesters yelling at her. Again, thank you, Women's Law Project, for being involved in litigation that gets a buffer zone put around clinics to protect the patients and providers. For Maria, getting the abortion is the easiest part. She's welcomed into a warm, friendly clinic's atmosphere where she gets a safe abortion procedure. Now, the hard thing about all of this is that you hear about Texas and how terrible Texas is and what's going on in Texas, and that is very real, but it's hard here for our patients. And I'm really thankful that we have the Women's Law Project here to help fight these battles. And I'm fearful that we're one veto pen away from having laws enacted like the laws that are in Texas. The last thing that worries me about being an abortion provider today is that someday I might have to make the impossible choice between breaking the law and doing a safe and life-saving procedure for my patients.
Well, thank you, Dr. Perriera, for giving us that kind of context about what's happening today. And you mentioned Texas, you know, and I want to sort of go a little more into that kind of what's going on in other states and the impact that's happening here. And, you know, the question I have is, you know, what do you expect the impact to be on Pennsylvania providers and patients if other states, particularly surrounding states, close the reproductive health clinics? And, you know, Dr. Perriera, if you could start us off with an answer to that.
Yeah, well, we at the clinics are committed to providing these services, and we suspect we would get an influx of patients from outside states, and we'd have to open our doors for longer amounts of time and really work much harder to do all the procedures that we can possibly do and extend hours, et cetera. But my biggest worry is that patients just won't be able to get the care that they need because of these laws.
Mm-hmm. Christine, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just kind of elaborate on Lisa's point about the fact that we can look to Texas as a preview of what's to come if Roe falls. So Texas near total abortion ban is causing devastating harm to people and communities in Texas every day. It continues to remain in effect. And that harm is spilling over to all parts of this country. Actually, a recent study shows that 11 states that don't border Texas, actually, and you have a visual now, and this is a study from Guttmacher Institute, are absorbing patients coming from Texas as they're fleeing their home state because they can't access care there. And at the Law Project, we are expecting to see an uptick of women traveling to Pennsylvania. We already have judicial bypass petitioners that we represent that are coming from Ohio and West Virginia, but we expect those numbers to increase. And actually another finding from Guttmacher is that in Pennsylvania, if Roe does fall, the increase of women who would be driving to Pennsylvania and of reproductive age would increase by 1,169%. And so let's just sit with that. Again, 1,169%. And for all of the reasons that Lisa and Amal have highlighted, Pennsylvania is not an oasis for access to sexual and reproductive health. So, looking at those numbers, it really at first made my stomach sink.
Yeah, it's pretty startling to hear that number. Thank you, Christine. Historically, we have looked to the federal court system to protect us, even though it's never been perfect or complete. And I just want to get a sense from you, all of you, our panelists, what you think our federal courts will do with abortion rights over the next year. If you could project what the federal landscape will look like a year from now, what do you think? Christine, if you don't mind going back to you to start with an answer to that.
Sure. Yeah, I can get us started. So despite big wins in federal courts, abortion rights have been under attack for decades now. And this is something that abortion rights advocates have been sounding the alarm on. And we've seen an unprecedented number of anti-abortion laws and regulations passed by state legislatures across the country, in part thanks to a well-funded and organized anti-abortion movement that's committed to criminalizing abortion. And they've had great success in chipping away at Roe. And it's likely to get worse, right, Sue?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah, and it's the vulnerable people who have lost access first. Young people who can't get access to judicial bypass. Low-income people who don't have coverage for the cost of abortion, rural people who can't even get anywhere near one of the remaining clinics. So already chipped away very substantially, and the core of Roe itself is on the chopping block. As Amal said, on December 1st, there's going to be argument in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization involving a 15-week pre-viability ban. And, you can't uphold a 15-week pre-viability abortion ban and still uphold the core of Roe versus Wade. They're inconsistent. We expect a decision in that case sometime between April and June. And people ask us all the time, how do you expect that to come out? Is it going to be an outright overruling of Roe? Is it going to be some kind of stealth attack on Roe? Is it going to be incremental again? We don't know. And I have a terrible track record at making predictions about what the Supreme Court's going to do, so I won't. However, when asked to stop Senate Bill 8, the Texas bounty hunter law, from taking effect, the conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court refused to stop it. And that gives you some pretty clear indication that the majority of those justices do not think that the abortion right merits protection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So which states do you think are likely to ban abortion if the Supreme Court overrules or further weakens Roe?
So it's likely about half, and based on an analysis by the Center for Reproductive Rights, if the Supreme Court does either weaken or overrule Roe, abortion would remain legal in 21 states and would likely be banned in 24 states. And also there are 12 states that currently have trigger bans on the books, and those are laws designed to ban abortion immediately.
And what about Pennsylvania? What do we think this means for Pennsylvania? Sue?
We're not in as bad shape as some other states, but we are in great danger. We have 17 abortion clinics, and you saw the numbers about how great the demand is going to be coming from other states as well as our own. It is really hard to open a new abortion clinic in Pennsylvania because of insanely burdensome facility overregulation. Our General Assembly is dominated by anti-abortion legislators, and a bad ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court means we're not going to be able to successfully challenge abortion restrictions in federal court the way we once could. Even if you get a good district judge or a good circuit ruling, it always ends at the U.S. Supreme Court, right? So for the first time, state legislatures across the country have passed over 100 abortion restrictions in a single year. They are popping up like mushrooms. Ohio is considering a bounty hunter abortion ban that's even more extreme than the Texas law it was modeled after. And Pennsylvania also has several new restrictions, including a 6-week ban. And I would put money on the chance that we will be seeing a Texas-style law get introduced at some point. But, lest we kind of fall into despair here, we are not out of moves. We have a state constitution that holds the promise of protecting abortion rights much more robustly than the federal constitution at this point. The state constitution is an independent source of rights, and we can turn to it if federal protection fails. And there's a case we brought on behalf of the Pennsylvania abortion providers almost 2 years ago now, which is pending before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court right now. And that case has the potential to restore Medicaid funding for abortion and establish abortion as a fundamental right under our state constitution. It's Allegheny Reproductive Health Center versus Department of Human Services. It directly challenges Pennsylvania's ban on Medicaid coverage of abortion. And we argue that the Medicaid ban is a form of sex discrimination prohibited by the Pennsylvania Equal Rights Amendment and Pennsylvania's equal protection provisions in our state constitution. We are writing the briefs right now. In that case, it'll get argued sometime in the early part of next year and could get decided anytime after that, maybe before, probably, I would guess, after the U.S. Supreme Court decides the Dobbs case and tells us what is left of Roe. So our opponents in the state legislature are very aware of this state Medicaid case. They have actually intervened as parties in the case and are participating in it. And they held a rally recently in Harrisburg where they talked about the case and what they plan to do about it in response. In case you missed it, we have a clip for you now.
So welcome to Harrisburg. It is just so energizing and it feels so good to see all of your beautiful faces here this morning as we celebrate the sanctity of life.
A lawsuit by the abortion industry and now before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is asking that court to require taxpayer funding of abortion, and listen to this, and to invent a right to abortion in Pennsylvania's Constitution.
Right now, as Representative Cutler spoke about, the Supreme Court, there's a case that would mandate, and the key word being mandate, taxpayer funding for abortions. That is not where I want my money to go. Is that where you want your money to go? No. Boo.
Such a ruling, which most expect they will do, would lead to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand in Pennsylvania right up until birth. And all our current pro-life laws would go, and future pro-life laws would be ruled unconstitutional. We must band together now to remedy this expected activist ruling with a constitutional amendment to protect our life and our pro-life laws.
How about we are pro-life? We are pro-life. We are pro-life.
there is the backlash. And no governor is going to save us from it, because proposed constitutional amendments can't be vetoed. The governor has no role in it. The legislature passes it in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, and it goes straight on the ballot for an up or down vote by the electorate. So we are witnessing the loss of our federal constitutional rights, and we cannot let our state constitutional rights be taken away too before they're even fully recognized.
Right. So the message here is that the situation is dire. But as Sue said, we are not out of moves. But at the same time, the other side isn't out of moves yet either. So the question I have for the panelists is there any reason to hope? So I would like to start with Dr. Perriera.
Well, for those of you that know me, you know that I'm a perpetual optimist, and I think there are reasons to hope. One reason to hope is that I really think that we have an excellent chance of winning this case and getting access to abortion and all reproductive health care services by government insurance. We have the potential to eliminate this racist practice that we have in our state right now. Secondly, the interesting thing about abortion now versus abortion in the past when it was illegal is that we have so many different great options, like mifepristone, which is the medication abortion pill, which increases access to early abortion because patients can just swallow a pill at home and take it, and swallow a pill in the clinic and take some pills at home to cause a miscarriage or the abortion. And the cool thing is that right now, before the FDA, this very highly regulated drug, they are considering whether or not to remove those regulations and make it a drug that can be prescribed in a pharmacy. And that would really increase access for people that need early abortion. So I do see hope in the world.
Thank you. Christine, how about you?
Echoing Lisa, I'm committed to being hopeful and radically optimistic, though if I'm being honest, some days are harder than others. And for all the reasons we've talked about, there are going to be many more harder days ahead of us. But I like this question because it reminds me of the last in-person conference I attended, literally a week before most of the world shut down due to the pandemic. And at this conference, I heard someone say that hope is a verb. And that really resonated with me. So following that conference, when I returned to my office, I printed out a sign with the words, hope is a verb, as a reminder that, and after I printed it out, I then placed it alongside a map of Pennsylvania freestanding abortion providers. So similar to the image that we've showed you all. And I did so so that it serves as a reminder that hope for a more just world, and that includes reproductive freedom and liberty that is a reality for all of us and not just some, requires that every single one of us who cares about these issues needs to also take action and mobilize. And that's not to discount the fact that we are living in a really hard time with a lot of great uncertainty. But when our basic human rights are on the line, we have to keep hope alive at all costs. And we can't allow the despair to bog us down into inaction. And I think one way we do this is by reframing this moment as an opportunity to make real change and radical change that wasn't possible under the current legal framework. And this is something that was long ago recognized by Black women and brown women and Indigenous folks and trans folks who recognize that through their own lived experiences, that the federal legal right to abortion as articulated under Roe and its precedents fell short. and that it was a grave mistake to talk about abortion rights in isolation, and that it is necessary that when we talk about abortion rights, we also need to talk about the right to parent and the right to live in healthy and safe environments. And so when white women who were making the strategy calls at the time ignored the concerns of Black and brown women, they created the reproductive justice framework and movement in order to use that to analyze structures of power and to center the intersecting identities that we live in. And so I find hope in the RJ framework because I think it's the path forward for progressive movements to mobilize together to achieve the change that we've been seeking and have been unable to achieve up to this point. And that would make it possible so that when we're talking about abortion rights, we're also talking about racial justice and environmental justice and economic justice and immigrant justice. And I think in greater numbers, we can have a more significant impact.
Thank you. Christine, those are great comments. Thank you so much. And I think the idea of thinking of hope as a verb also really resonates with me, that we must act. And with that in mind, what can our supporters and participants do to change the trajectory of our future? Or is it already too late? And Sue, I think I'll start with you.
Oh, it is absolutely not too late. Absolutely, it is right on time. This is the year, right now, the moment we're in, when these questions are getting decided. And if you are here listening to this, you are already plugged in, involved, informed, you care. So, you're already doing what you need to be doing, but you need to be doing more. Don't wait for the courts to tell you what your rights are. Every person here has to speak up louder and clearer than we've ever done before. Don't wait to be invited. Our movement infrastructure is not as big and sophisticated as any of us would wish. Don't wait for someone to organize you. Just step up and take action. If you aren't already following the Women's Law Project, you should do that now. Follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our blog, look at our website. It is very rich, and there will always be something on there that you can do every day if you want to advance this struggle. What else can we tell people to do?
Well,
so another thing,
people, sorry.
I was just the floor, Lisa.
Vote. We need to vote. Everybody must vote and I'm hopeful that everyone that's here is doing that. But again, the gubernatorial race matters so much for this issue. It is imperative that you vote like your life depends on it, because for some of my patients and for some of you, perhaps it does. It really does. So please get out the vote yourself, and really look at the people that support the issues that you care about.
We have got to stop that constitutional amendment. We have got to stop our state legislators from amending our state constitutional claims out from under us in this litigation. So tell every state official, starting with your state legislators, hands off the Pennsylvania Constitution.
And another thing that people can do is volunteer for us. We're going to need all kinds of help absorbing patients coming from Ohio and West Virginia, including logistical support, like transportation.
Yeah. And I'd also like to go back to... Oh, go ahead, Sue.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add, I'm in need of legal observers now for some of the protest activity outside the clinics. I would like to invite people to join in all of the activism around the Dobbs argument on December 1st. We have allies in Mississippi who are watching and needing to see that we are out here supporting them.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back just briefly to what Dr. Perriera said in the beginning when we talked about sort of framing this discussion and ways of talking about it and how important it is to talk about abortion, to keep talking about it. That's something that every one of us here and everyone you know needs to do as much as possible, and talk about it with your state legislators, right? Really be out there on this issue. I think that's really important right now.
Yeah, and I'll just add to Amal's point that we should also make a commitment to have those conversations at the dinner table with our loved ones and friends, and that's a significant piece of this all.
So I will just add to that, inspired, I suppose, by the Kyle Rittenhouse case. I'm going to say something truthful that's going to make some people uncomfortable or mad. I am speaking to the white women like me in our audience here. White women have to stop voting for anti-abortion politicians. We're seeing time and again in election after election, a majority of white women whose reproductive rights are on the chopping block align ourselves with white men in the way that they vote. 52% of white women voters in 2016 helped put a man in the White House who did not respect them and who appointed 3 of the justices who are poised to take away our rights. 57% of white women just voted for Glenn Youngkin for governor of Virginia and flipped that governor's seat to the anti-abortion side. You know, the protection of white privilege is motivating many white women to vote for conservative candidates who are also anti-abortion. And that is why I personally believe that racism is the singular enemy that can lose us the fight for abortion rights. If we can start to understand that white women are in large part what got us into this mess, and if we can start to talk about that with our sisters, even if it's uncomfortable, if we can agree to walk away from our privilege for the sake of justice and our collective survival, if we can do that, I don't see how we can lose.
Well, thank you for all of those suggestions, everyone. And thank you to everyone listening tonight for supporting our work. And before we close, I do want to turn to the questions, because we did get a few. And one of them is, says, really appreciating Christine's comments. How do we bring abortion into the current Black Lives Matter and anti-racism national conversations and media narratives? So that, who on the panel would like to start with that?
I can start. As I was talking about earlier, I find hope in RJ, and that is the solution. So we start talking about, when we talk about gender and race together, along with one's financial stability and the environments in which they live, when we're talking about these issues together, we start to actually see the whole picture. And these are conversations that have been had with people who are directly impacted by these really regressive laws, so Black and brown people. So where this conversation is lacking is among white folks' tables. And so I think that that is something that, even if you can just start to when you're talking about your anger around these abortion bans that are popping up, you need to also be talking about race and white supremacy. And that is one thing that, you know, folks who are trying to, you know, do better, that's something that you can be doing.
Thank you, Christine. And we have another question that says, if the Pennsylvania Supreme Court denies our case, will we go to the U.S. Supreme Court? I don't know if you have an answer to that, Sue, but do you have thoughts
Oh, yes,
you'd like
I do.
to share?
And the answer is no, we won't. Our Medicaid case is 100% grounded in state law, in the state constitution. It cannot and will not find its way into the federal system. That was intentionally done. What we are doing now is focusing on a particular strength that Pennsylvania has, a really vibrant state constitution that is materially different from the federal constitution in many respects and stronger than the federal constitution. So we are happy to be in a state law context.
Thanks, Sue. So, thank you everyone for joining us here tonight for this panel discussion. Please stay tuned to, first sign up for social media, as we said, and stay updated on all of the issues that we've talked about today. And for now, stay tuned because our Executive Director, Carol Tracy, will join us in a second for an announcement.